Hey, it's the range running, and I am sure happy that you made it. Did you know that in 1871, Colt had patented at least 2 rear-loading revolvers using metallic cartridges, Colt House Revolver and the Open-Top. The House Revolver went into production the same year, in 1871, but the Open-Top didn't start production until 1872. These were true cartridge revolvers, unlike those that had been converted from black powder to cartridge cylinders, such as the 1851 and 1860. Now, I bet you are wondering where all this is leading. I'm going to tell you about one Colt firearm that I consider actually won the West by losing. It is the 1872 Colt Open-Top conversion revolver, of which I have a Uberti reproduction in .45 Colt chambering. So, stay tuned, because I am going to tell you all about it. In 1872, the Army asked for a more powerful caliber with a stronger frame. 2 Colt engineers, Charles Richards and William Mason, were instrumental in developing cartridge-converted revolvers up until 1871, when the first true cartridge revolver was developed. The 1872 Army Open-Top revolver, a refined 1871, was submitted to the U.S. Army for acceptance as a new revolver, but was rejected. Colt went back to the drawing board. Mason redesigned the frame to incorporate a top strap similar to the Remington revolvers and placed the rear sight on the rear of the frame. He consulted with Richards on some other improvements. His new gun was chambered for the newest caliber known as the .45 Colt, and the 1873 Colt Single-Action Army revolver was born, accepted by the U.S. Army, and became what we know of today as the Peacekeeper, and still remains so. Even with the rejection by the U.S. Army, approximately 7,000 1872 Colt Open-Top revolvers were manufactured from 1872 to 1873, and were carried by many. The 1872 Army Open-Top revolver was in my mind, the actual turning point that would make Colt the leading manufacturer of revolvers for years to come. And for this reason, I wanted one. But original 1872 Colt Open-Top conversion revolvers are rare as hen's teeth, and I would not be able to afford one even if one was found. Uberti, fortunately, has made my want come to fruition with its reproduction of the 1872 Colt Open-Top conversion revolver. Chambering of the Uberti Reproduction is in .45 Colt, in keeping with the rest of my collection. Needless to say, those 44 Henry rimfire cartridges, the original chambering, are no longer available. The cylinder, as well as everything forward of it, and the trigger guard and grip frame, is nicely blued steel, while the receiver and side loading gate is color hardened steel. That lends a nice contrast to the rest of the revolver. As part of the conversion to cartridges from percussion revolvers, the 1872 Army Open-Top revolver has a spring-loaded ejector rod that assists in ridding the revolver of spent cartridges, similar to the ejector rod used on the later 1873 Colt Peacemaker revolvers. The ejector rod is on the right side of the barrel, secured by a heavy screw in the frame, and has a small lever that must be first rotated upward and then rearward to expel the spent cartridge. A loading gate keeps the rounds within the cylinder, and a simple push of the gate outward releases the loading gate. The cylinder in this particular model holds 6 rounds of .45 Colt, although other models are available in .38 Special. Like all cartridge conversion reproductions by Uberti, revolvers can fire modern smokeless powder or cartridges with black powder. High-pressure loads are not recommended, and any SASS-approved cowboy ammunition should provide years of enjoyment and service from these revolvers. The flash cap, the distance between the forcing cone and the face of the cylinder, is less than 0.04 of an inch. The forcing cone end of the barrel slopes nicely into the cylinder area, which is true to the original design of these revolvers. Unlike revolvers with top straps, where hot gases are forced into the top strap when the cartridge fires, the open-top revolver allows hot gases to escape upward with nothing to stop them. Spacer blocks between cylinder and frame were common, as were two-part cylinders, where the cylinder had to be removed from the revolver for loading and reloading. Richards-Mason conversion removed all that stuff, and what resulted was a cartridge revolver that loaded and unloaded via a side gate that is also part of the recoil shield. The cylinder does not have recessed chambers. There is a gap between the rear of the cylinder and the frame. This gap allows the shooter to instantly see if the firearm is loaded. The cylinder locks up tight, and there is absolutely no play front to rear or side to side. This revolver is fitted tightly, and that attests to the quality of Uberti reproductions. The cylinder has scrollwork, just like the original, a Navy battle, and is not fluted, which adds strength to the cylinder. Chamber thickness is about 0.047 inch, so no, this is not a Ruger, and ammunition should be selected to complement the firearm and not destroy it. For 250 grain .45 Colt ammunition, I like to stay around the 850 feet per second velocity, if not under, which is a pleasing load to shoot. If I want to run hot loads, I'll move to the Ruger Blackhawk. Unlike the original 1872 Colt Open-Top revolver, the hammer in the Uberti 1872 Army Open-Top revolver incorporates a safety block that operates by the turn of a screw, which keeps firing pin from protruding into the frame. The screw can only be seen when the hammer is in the half-cock or full-cock position. Although the block safety does move away from the original design, I have come to not even notice it at all. The firing pin is part of the hammer and plunges through a corresponding hole in the frame to strike the cartridge. This is definitely not a revolver to carry with 6 rounds. If the hammer is struck or dropped over a live round, something not so nice will happen when the cartridge fires. As with all revolvers of this nature, move the hammer to the half-cock position. Load 1, skip 1, load 4, and then pull the hammer to the full cock position. And then use the thumb to control the descent of the hammer, while the trigger is pulled and comes to rest on an empty chamber. Although not advised to dry fire this revolver, the use of snap caps is highly recommended when doing so. I use those by A-Zoom for dry firing a revolver. There is absolutely no take-up in the trigger, and, on this particular model, the trigger breaks crisply at a hair less than 3 pounds, just a hit of over travel. As the trigger in the Uberti 1872 Army Open-Top revolver wears in, I am sure that it will smooth out and become lighter still. I have found that with Uberti triggers, trigger discipline is a must to ensure premature discharges. Some say that the open-top revolver was not as strong as those with a closed top. It could be argued as the open-top revolver using a much thicker cylinder pin that is found on closed-top revolvers and which aids to the strength of the open-top revolver. The cylinder is held into place by a wedge that is inserted and locked into a very robust frame. To take down an open-top revolver of this type, a screwdriver is used to turn the wedge retaining screw until it is parallel with the cylinder pin. Although it is possible to push the wedge through the frame after a few sessions of disassembly, sometimes it takes a small hammer and something soft to get the wedge started. Afterward, it can be plucked from the frame and set aside. The barrel is then grabbed and pulled forward off of the cylinder pin. The cylinder is then rotated off of the cylinder pin. To assemble the revolver, the hammer is pulled slightly rearward. The cylinder is pushed onto the cylinder pin and then rotated slightly until it engages the cylinder hand, that part that rotates the cylinder. The barrel assembly is then pushed onto the cylinder pin. 2 mating pins are part of the frame assembly and mate with 2 holes in the barrel assembly. The wedge is inserted into the frame and slightly tapped into place, and the locking screw is turned just enough to secure the wedge onto the frame. With a practiced hand, disassembling the open-top revolver can be performed faster than field stripping a 1911 Colt pistol. Care must be taken to prevent the wedge from going too far into the frame, as the wedge also contributes to the forcing cone to cylinder gap, and it is quite possible to bind the cylinder. The Uberti 1872 Army Open-Top revolver weighs in at 2.2 pounds dry and has enough handle to hold on to. The wide and flared grip bottom helps in keeping muzzle rise in check, while the shape of the grip allows the revolver to roll back in the hand, which puts the hammer spur within easy reach of the cocking thumb. The hammer spur has a diamond-shaped pattern to ensure a good surface for cocking and decocking. The hammer has a deep valley in which to rest the thumb during cocking or holding the hammer while decocking. The grip itself is a one-piece wood affair with the usual Uberti stain, but is slightly darker in color than most Uberti revolvers that I have and have seen. According to Uberti, the wood is walnut. They are well mated to the grip frame and are nice enough to not consider refinishing or replacement. I like the dark wood grips, as they lend a rich touch to the revolver. Surprisingly, the revolver is nicely balanced. With a 7.5-inch barrel, you would expect a revolver to be barrel heavy. This, however, is not the case when 5 .45 Colt rounds are loaded into the chambers of the cylinder. The steel backstrap and trigger guard is a 2-piece unit that is attached to the Colt steel frame by 6 screws. A single screw mounts the backstrap to the trigger guard. The caliber of the firearm is stamped on the left side of the revolver, just behind the trigger guard. The firearm serial number is stamped on both the frame and the brass just beneath the cylinder at the front. 1871 is stamped into the frame, just above the disassembly wedge. Also, and just below the cylinder on the left side of the frame, 2 patent marks are stamped that denote the patents in 1871 and 1872. The top of the barrel is stamped with the manufacturer's stamps. The sights on the 1872 Army Open-Top revolver are quite unique. The front sight is a fixed-bladed sight that is inset on the front of the barrel, while the rear sight is unique in that the rear sight is a raised notch at the rear of the barrel near the forcing cone. Since the 1872 Army, like the 1871 model, was an open-top revolver, there were not too many choices in providing a rear sight. On some open-top revolvers, there was a sighting notch cut into the hammer. When the hammer was at full cock, the front sight was aligned with the rear sight, the hammer. With the 1872 Army Open-Top revolver, the front sight is aligned with the raised rear notch. The front sight and the rear notch are very thin. These were more instinctive shooting firearms than target revolvers. Simply point the barrel in the right direction and pull the trigger. However, it is surprising how accurate these firearms can be when time is taken to actually use the sights. Although I have always felt that the Remington revolvers were superior to the Colt revolvers of the day, the Colt Open-Top revolvers were exceptional, and are now more exceptional, due to modern manufacturing and materials of the Reproductions. Uberti 1872 Army Open-Top revolver fills a niche in my humble collection, in that the original was a stepping stone to a more advanced single-action revolver designed for Colt, the 1873 Colt Single-Action Army. Most folks unfamiliar with revolvers of this nature discount them because of their supposed poor accuracy. Nothing could be further from the truth. They are as accurate as any modern firearm at combat distances, and sometimes well beyond. I am in the habit of firing single-action revolvers from a standing one-hand position. I have to say that the accuracy of the Uberti 1872 Army Open-Top revolver was on par with the 1871 Colt Navy, the 1858 Remington New Army conversion, and the 1875 Remington New Army Reproduction revolvers from Uberti. As with the 1871 Colt Navy, I was expecting much more flash from the top of the forcing cone, due to the revolver not having a top strap, but I was surprised on how little side flash there actually was. Perhaps it was due to the tight forcing cone to cylinder gap, or simply the shape of the outside of the barrel at the forcing cone. At this point, I really don't know, as the 1871 Colt Navy is the same way. What I do know is that the Uberti 1872 Open-Top revolver is a fine piece of work. It is a natural pointer for me, and accurate enough to make me want to shoot it more. The Uberti 1872 Open-Top revolver also looks great and makes me appreciate the modern firearms that we do have available to us. So, let me quit yakking about it, and let's pick up with shooting it. While stiff when new, everything is breaking in well, and the Uberti 1872 Army Open-Top revolver is starting to show its mettle. While very similar in appearance to the 1871 Colt Navy Open-Top revolver, which was never used by the Navy by the way, the 1872 Army Open-Top revolver is a welcome addition to my family of Uberti Reproduction revolvers. The 1872 Army Open-Top revolver was, I believe, the revolver that actually won the West. Without its rejection by the U.S. Army, the 1873 Colt Single-Action Army may not have been developed. I would say that we should be glad that the 1872 Army Open-Top revolver was rejected. Well, it's time to close yet another chapter in the Range Ronin Chronicles. I hope that you enjoyed this review and will return for more reviews of mine. Until we cross paths again, stay vigilant, stay armed, and most of all, stay safe out there.